Hello Internet, Taliesin here. Welcome to another episode of the Weekly Reset. Taliesin and Evitel's Wondrous Wisdomshow in a week where patch 10.2.7 Dark Heart is about to release with the Harbinger quests that lead us into the next expansion. We've got a new cinematic to get our teeth into. I suspect one of two that we'll see next week. And this is just how WoW is right now. It's absolutely non-stop because we've also got a new alpha build which enabled the Hallowfall zone for testing. And Internet, we're going to be talking all about this place and the two new dungeons in depth. But let me just say right now, this is, in my opinion, obviously, clearly, undeniably one of the best zones ever in this game. There is so much magic in this place. I can't wait for you to play it yourselves. I can't wait to talk about it in just a moment. But before that, 10.2.7. Don't worry, we're going to make this quick. Going live on Tuesday for NA, Wednesday for EU, and featuring the Draenei and Troll Heritage Armor, with the Troll questline called Return to the Echo Isle, which, granted, is quite a predictable name for it really, but even so, when I read that for the first time, it still gave me just a little tingle. Emberthor's Visaged questline unlocks personal tabards, which is fun, and also reminds me, yeah, I think we really need an update on those tabard designs actually. It sounds like a good 20th anniversary project if you ask me. Most exciting for this week, obviously though, are those Alleria Dark Heart quests, where the hunt for Xalatath will officially begin. A genuine bona fide lead into a new expansion that begins before the pre-patch for the new expansion. Honestly, I think those extra 0.7 patches will go down alongside dragon riding as one of the best of Dragonflight's evolutions of the game. The new Dark Heart cinematic is something we've talked about already for ages on the podcast this week. You can find that new episode in the WoW podcast, obviously playlist on this channel, but my main takeaway is that it's kind of impossible to view it outside of the context of what we already know is to come. This is a cinematic dripping in dramatic irony, as Khadgar and Alleria set about trying to recover the Dark Heart artifact from the Harbinger. And, you know, no spoilers here because none needed, honestly. I think it's impossible not to pick up on some very large hints and foreshadowing that in the short term, this is a quest that will end up a lot more serious than either of them are expecting. Dark Heart clearly plays at the beginning of next week's questline, and I remain convinced that we'll get a part 2 at the end. The cinematic including those shots that we've already seen in the War Within features trailer. So even more to look forward to there. Remix Mr. Pandaria isn't included in the initial 10.2.7 content. The global launch for that new leveling collectathon is the 16th of May, and then we can finally start to evaluate Dragonflight as a whole, because it is, to every practical degree, finished. And you know what? I think it will be remembered rather well. Actually, I think Dragonflight will go down as one of the all-time great expansions, especially in a few years' time when it's evaluated in the context of being the reset that washed out the bad taste left behind from Shadowlands, instilled one of the best gameplay philosophies the game has ever had, and gave the new trilogy the foundation to build from and hopefully thrive. Best case scenario, the World Soul Saga is an absolute banger, of course, and we'll come to think of Dragonflight as the Hobbit to the World Soul Saga's Lord of the Rings trilogy, if that makes sense. It makes sense to me, of course, for that to be the case, then the World Soul Saga has to be an absolute banger, and so far the alpha has been pretty good. The Isle of Dawn is a big, open, very pretty space, which when we saw it was basically empty but had lots of potential. The Ringing Depths was the zone that I guess we all imagined when we were told about the underground expansion. Much more finished in terms of quests and population, and fun, with a good pair of dungeons. But look, this isn't meant to be mean because I like this zone, but I personally am always going to find it hard to get super excited about an underground mining zone, especially so soon after the Zaralek Caverns. It's good, it's nothing we haven't seen before. This week though, we got Hallowfall, and Internet, Hallowfall is like nothing we have ever seen in World of Warcraft before. It's the zone that was the obvious standout from the War Within's reveal at BlizzCon, with its huge crystal embedded in the ceiling, radiating its light and energy throughout a vast cavern. It's the one that many of us have been looking forward to above all others, and internet, I am extremely happy to report that this zone is exquisite. It is so much more than just a striking visual. Hallowfall has the character and vibe and history and intrigue and story and sense of danger and uniqueness that we haven't quite got from the other two zones of this expansion so far, to the extent that it kind of feels like this is where the story of the War Within actually starts. Bluebot spoiler from here on in, obviously, but our introduction to the zone is through Anduin, who says he has heard of the Arathi and their huge crystal and wants to go check it out. And you know, he's been feeling a bit down recently. He needs his friends. He needs our support. He wants to go and see the big crystal. We're going to take him to go see the big crystal, all right? Something it turns out is pretty easy to do, actually, because the entrance to the zone is like, it's literally right next to where we entered the Ringing Depths. I mean, it's right there. It's easy. I don't know why everyone isn't checking it out, to be honest. We are introduced pretty much instantly to Faelin Lothar, who obviously isn't Anduin Lothar's daughter, because their last common ancestor was 1200 years ago on the other side of the world. And we begin to learn about the Arathi of Hallowfall. Maria Hamilton said in the BlizzCon What's Next panel that
these are descendants of the original Arathorian Empire, and they've arrived relatively recently and through some somewhat mysterious circumstances. And they find themselves trapped here within Khazalgar.
And here, we now have that mystery explained. We are the Hallowfall expedition of the Arathi Empire. We followed the Emperor's sacred vision across the sea to fight in Renilash, the final battle between light and dark. As we crossed the sea, we were caught in a storm. The fleet was enveloped in golden radiance. In a flash, our entire armada was transported down here. So yeah, they were just magically teleported on their way somewhere else by forces unknown. We later learn around 15 years ago and have been fighting for survival against the waves of Nerubians swarming up from the depths ever since. It does feel likely, doesn't it, that whatever transported them is connected in some way to that giant Naaru crystal in the cave ceiling, as they call it, the star Belanar, which means Emperor's Vision. I already have quite a lot of questions. Obviously, why were they transported? Who transported them? And how? But also, who is this Emperor of the Arathi Empire? And the Empire is based on the other side of the Western Storms, right? And that Empire has been missing its best fighters for the last 15 years, like its whole armada, because it sent them to go and fight in a final battle that, so far, hasn't happened. Is the Empire still there? Were they attacked once their enemies realized they were severely weakened? Will we get to visit them in, I mean, it's gotta be Avaloran, right? In future patches or expansions. And the Arathi, of course, are a mixture of humans, elves, and half-elves. The new half-elves that it looks like we will soon have the ability to unlock as customization options for our own. And I love that. Just like with Faerun's famous second name, no one even ever talks about this as far as I've seen. No one mentions it. It's not a thing anyone finds unusual. The game really does rely on you knowing just a little bit of WoW lore to understand why they are comprised the way they are. But this setup, the Arathi stranded underground, fending off constant attacks from below, carving out a home and society under that star, is so brilliant, and it has a real old school WoW feel to it. The Arathi obviously look incredible with their mix of human models and Kultiran human models and every elf you can imagine, and those half-elfin ears and classical Crusader style gear, their airships and farmland and water wheels, and their main city, which is actually really huge, like genuine expansion capital huge. The wall that they've built along the edges of the huge hole that the Nerubians attack from, which must be constantly manned, the torches constantly lit. It's just so fantasy, you know? I love it. And I mean it when I say WoW has never seen anything quite like this place before, although there are many places it reminds you of in different ways. The populated areas where the Arathi have built feels a bit like if the Kultirans and the Scarlet Crusade had a bunch of babies and they built all the stuff they like, but underground. There are shipyards and docks dotted all over the place, and a sense of makeshift industry buzzing away in the background the whole time, along with huge places of worship, of course, and also, wonderfully, an orphanage, which it seems is a large quest hub. The outskirts of their settlements are made up of farmland, which has a Mists feel for me. The less populated parts of the cavern have a distinct Nazjatar vibe, except instead of the Naga, it's the terrifying Nope people called Kobis that skulk in the shadows, waiting to lure the unsuspecting into a watery grave, either by just jumping them and dragging them in, or there are Kobis fishermen who go fishing for people using pretend people as bait. This is an actual thing, but they are terrifying, I promise. This is one of those zones that really nails the feeling of a functional society. You can see how it works and fits together. You can imagine exactly what living there would be like. But the zone that Hallowfall reminds me most of, the real vibe I get more than any other, and this may surprise you, is Hellfire Peninsula. Obviously, they look very different, but hear me out. Everyone hates Hellfire now because leveling Otsu there for years before Chromie time was horrible, but try and think back to the first time you went there, when you stepped through the dark portal into a world that was completely alien and hostile feeling. Remember just how magical those oases of order were on the landscape, the Horde and Alliance garrisons scratched out of the destruction, full of grizzled soldiers who had been abandoned there years and years ago and had no other purpose than just to survive whatever was thrown at them. That is what Hallowfall feels like. People just trying to get by in a place that they did not choose to be, and which is trying, basically, to eat them. It's great, and the Arathi are so awesome. They have their military, and they have their Lamplighters, who Faelin is a member of, and it's their job to keep those torches lit along the border wall and in other locations throughout the zone. Something that, it will not surprise you to learn, becomes a major gameplay mechanic in questing and events and dungeons. There is at least one world event where you maintain the torches in a further out settlement. But it's not all lanterns and holy fire. There are achievements connected to farming in this zone as well. So that theme of constantly just fighting to survive on many different fronts in many different ways, of dignity in the face of monsters, is going to be constant. And of course then there's Belanar, which makes such a stunning centerpiece. Like, genuinely, I think the single best advert Blizz can make for this expansion is this view. Just put this out as an advert with text that says, "This is the new Warcraft expansion. Seriously, people will come back and play this game." It's stunning. It has a unique vibe, but then there's the fact that it changes to a Void version as part of the story and periodically just out in the open world. At which point, Void monsters and a giant floating Void squid will appear and attack. It works as a cause, but also a representation of the sense of despair in the Arathi population. As time goes on and their numbers dwindle, many lose hope and begin to trust the dark whispers that can be heard in the back of their minds constantly in this place. This was clarified at BlizzCon, but I see people ask it all the time. No, that is not the tip of the sword of Sargeras. That's the other side of the world, and not in a Britain to Australia it goes through the world kind of thing. It's just not. It's far more interesting than that. There's also a very intriguing talking fish who seems quite familiar, although I have no idea where from. He just seems familiar, you know? Ooh, and there's a very cool and interesting subplot involving crabs in the cabin that are being infused with huge amounts of arcane energy, which may be coming through the ground from a certain city that might be on the ground at the top. Well, I'm sure I don't know anything about that. What? And there's a twink mage in the Arathi who is the only surviving mage in the zone, and he's not really a mage, he's just an apprentice, but he's the only one left, so he pulls rank, who is trying to find a way to create portals home, has been for the last 15 years, and thinks that this new mage energy seeping through the surface of the earth might be the key. It's an incredible zone. There's no way I can possibly do it justice just talking about it. It really is an instant WoW classic. I've got the feeling Blizz are planning for players to spend a lot of their time in in there at endgame, and I've got a feeling it will be the Arathi who lead us through the future patches of this expansion too, because, you know, they've got airships. The potential is kind of endless there. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, typical Tally shill. Of course he's only got good things to say about WoW, right? Of course he has no complaints about rubbish fall. But I do have some complaints, actually. You can't reach the crystal. There's an invisible wall. It sucks. It looks stunning. People are going to try and fly up to it. And I get that it's better if they can't get there for practical and story reasons, but we can do better than an invisible wall, right? Like, make it start burning you up or teleport you out again. It loves teleporting shit, apparently. And that applies to the whole cavern, actually, because currently you can't fly all the way to the ceiling. There is an invisible ceiling before you get there, and that just feels very weird and bad. Like, you don't need an invisible ceiling when there's an actual cave ceiling a little bit above it, surely. That's weird and bad. Also, it's a nagging feeling. Look, we still don't know how being underground so much is going to make us feel as players in the long run. Even with this zone being so beautiful and unique and varied, it is still an underground cavern, and I feel like underground areas are always going to have a shorter shelf life than overground zones, you know? I think players just get fatigued and done with them mentally quicker. I honestly don't think that the other zone, the Ringing Depths, has enough about it to be a zone that people enjoy playing in a few months down the line. I'm certain Hallowfall will fare better, but how much better remains to be seen. Also, Faelin Lothar's jousting sword is extremely cool, but very impractical. That shit would break instantly if you ever tried swinging it around like she does. My immersion is completely ruined. Any other complaints about Faelin, Mr. GM?
Is this a side quest? Are you reading a book? Imagine the forearm strength to hold a book like that.
The dungeons. The dungeons are insane, and also focus heavily on the light and shadow at play in the zone. Priory of the Sacred Flame is the one you've probably seen pictures of, and it feels quite a lot like Scarlet Monastery in some ways, fighting your way through the grounds and then into the Priory itself, into that stunning room with the window framing Belanar. This is the everyone likes the light a bit too much dungeon. There's a Waves of Ads boss and a Light Priest boss who I can't tell you too much about mechanics wise. He looked like he was about to do something really cool when he hit 100% power. We killed him at 99%. And then the final fight against the Prioress, who has light beams that chase you around and then teleports up to that stunning top level where you have to chase her and stop a cast as she summons waves of light-bound followers to attack you. And like I say, it's always hard to judge early alpha dungeons because they are generally very easy. But I think this will be a popular Mythic Plus one. It's very straightforward with lots of choice in terms of trash. It's beautiful. Obviously, it reminds me of Scarlet Monastery, like I say, but also the Vault from Heavensward for all you 14 players. The Dawnbreaker is the second Hallowfall dungeon, and I don't think it'll be quite as popular in Mythic Plus. I wanted to say this is hands down my favorite dungeon of the alpha so far. No competition, because it is madder than a box of frogs. It takes place throughout the whole of the Arathi capital in Hallowfall. But before you get to the first boss, you jump onto an airship, the Dawnbreaker in question, or at least some of you do. The ramp onto the ship breaks after the first person crosses it, so you have to make sure that you all cross together, or up to 4 of you are going to get stranded in weird places on the outside of the ship as it takes off and you eventually die. No big deal, you respawn back in the now airborne ship, but you just know it's going to be lots of fun for pugs. That I respect that troll from Blizz. I'm in favor of it. And at this stage I'm thinking, okay, this is basically like Grimrail, but in the air. It's cool that you see the zone going by in the background as we blast loads of voidy people, because yeah, this is the people who like the void a bit too much dungeon from Hallowfall. Another voidy dungeon that's at least one in each zone so far, and the amount of void has been getting more and more pronounced as the zones have progressed. So you kill some void dudes, the star's all purple now, it's all very cool. As always, I feel a little bit awkward playing as a Void Weaver Discipline Priest at this stage. I kind of feel like everyone is giving me funny looks like, are you sure you're not with them? But then suddenly, we're supposed to go and blow up 2 other ships that are firing on us, just like in Icecrown Citadel. Except, of course, War Within has something that Wrath never did: dynamic flight. That's right, fam. Dawnbreaker isn't just an airship dungeon, it's a dragon riding dungeon. And I have to say, swooping to the other ships, clearing them out, setting explosives, and getting TFO is awesome. I am a huge fan. At this stage, I was like, I am so glad they managed to get some dragon riding. Just one instance, this little tiny bit of dragon riding into this dungeon. Nice one. So then the first boss comes along and we're blasting, and she has a mechanic where she summons a huge void orb that consumes the entire ship that you are fighting on. And the only way that you can survive it is to mount up in the middle of the fight and fly off of the deck, out of reach of the huge voidy ball of death, until it's disappeared and it's safe to go back and carry on the fight. And at this stage, I was like, fair play. That is a genuinely cool and unique dragon riding mechanic they put in there. I really respect those two dragon riding mechanics that they have in this dungeon. This is awesome. Anyway, then it turns out that Nerubians have taken over the whole of the city beneath you, and there's one huge one that you have to kill, but he's buffed by 4 lieutenants that you have to kill first. So it's back onto the flying mounts for an open, free roaming section where you have to kill these 4 ads without pulling the millions of other packs that are jamming up the city, and without pulling the boss who is patrolling and tends to pop up right behind you just when you least expect it. Once you've done that, you need to find a nice open bit of the town, good luck, to kill the boss. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, my Mythic Plus pug is going to get absolutely destroyed in this bit. I think you might be right. This is a pug killer right here. It took ages, and I mean seriously, like 25 minutes both times I did this dungeon. But to be fair, that's because we had no idea what we were doing and we were learning on the job, just like when we first tested Noku Defensive. And just like Noku Defensive, the agreed upon route through this section will evolve in the community very quickly. This will actually end up being relatively simple, you'd have thought, but yeah, lots can go wrong if you're not careful, for sure. And at this stage, I was like, I cannot believe they have managed to fit 3 distinct dragon riding mechanics into this dungeon. Fair play to them. I respect their commitment to the bit. What a great dungeon. So anyway, the final boss is back up on the Dawnbreaker, a huge insectoid void monster who you have to throw exploding barrels at, which is fair enough. But then, halfway through, he F's off and you have to mount up again and follow him while staying close enough to the smaller ship, which is protecting you from dying in all the shadow, zooming around Hallowfall, picking up glowy yellow orbs. I don't know why you have to get those, but they're there. You better believe I'm going to get them, until you land in the middle of the square and finish the job. Finally. It's insane, and actually, I suspect we haven't even seen all of it yet. The final boss fight ends at 30% health at the moment, at which point you are all just instantly teleported back to the ship. No fanfare, no boss dying animation. It's incredibly sudden and jarring, and you know, it wouldn't surprise me if it turned out that there was a final phase of the fight that Blizz aren't showing us for spoiler reasons. It could also just be bugged. This dungeon is buggy as shit. There's a lot going on. I absolutely hate this dungeon, and it is my favorite dungeon I have played in years. It is absolutely off the rails, like literally, actually. I adore it, and I hope it turns out well. All in all, this latest build is an absolute banger. We're still a huge way off this expansion being anything like ready. We haven't even talked about hero talents on this show yet, but I wanted to dedicate this episode to Hallowfall and its dungeons because I think it's such a special place. At the same time, unique and new, while also stirring some of the oldest and most primal WoW expansion zone feels. Can you imagine if its soundtrack is a callback to the lonely Hellfire Peninsula trumpet? I don't think I can cope. I would genuinely love to hear your views about this place, how you feel about it, and any observations you have. Even if you don't like it, it's fair, put them in the comments below, and see you next week for Azj-Kajet, the Nerubian capital. I'm sorry that there was no opening skit or Evitel in this episode. We are off to a Baldur's Gate 3 concert in London this weekend. I didn't want to skip this episode entirely in a week where there was this incredible zone to talk about, so here we are. The show will be back in full next week, and also don't forget our podcast will be recording live on Mondays from now on, at least until the alpha stops updating on Thursdays about an hour after we would otherwise finish recording. So maybe we'll see you there for that too. Thank you to our patrons for all your support. As always, without you, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin and Evitel. From me, Tally, have a great weekend. Cheerio.